right. Well, thank you. And before we jump to the next question, any other elements in play that we wanted to cite here? If not, I'll ask a follow-up question. That's okay.
I just want to say I just
Yep,
second
go ahead.
everything she just said because it's so so many times we lose people because of our lack of compassion and desire to welcome people. We put a standard out that people cannot meet because of the fact that they feel so unwelcome. I have always seen that compassion has always taught people and changed people faster in any form of way, rather than making people feel unwelcome. It's so important that we share power rather than have people feel like they own the power. And I feel like in a lot of these situations, you have women that are innately powerful and that have a lot to offer, that create, that build, that teach men. And then they're stripped of that if they're not wearing certain things, if they don't look the part. And that can really work on someone's insecurities, especially when they're trying to build a relationship with Allah. I think more than anything, it's important to remember that, how you treat someone deeply affects them, and it can make them move closer or way farther. And in these spaces, it's important that men, when they see this type of stuff happening, that they are vocal. They are vocal about it. So there's a time and a place for everything. So the calling out publicly is degrading, right? Especially with a child, because the 10-year-old is a child, and everything that we do based on the scenario and what we do to children deeply impacts them as adults. And so that is something that we need to remember too. And sometimes we get so focused on like just being strict and following the rules and this is how things should be done, that the humanity part of it is completely gone. And so it's important that we remember that part and that we are gentle with our correction, right? Rather than being like, this is what it is, right? Because gentleness have also pierced people way farther than forcefulness.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Yumi, for there is a stomach, a lot written on how to give advice. I don't think that was necessarily the right way to do it in the scenario. And so the last question that I have is how can we be an effective ally in religious spaces? And I know, Ada, you touched on this already in your comments. One thing I'd love to kind of hear everybody respond to is that, I've spent a lot of time in masjids personally, at least, especially the last couple of years of my life. One thing I found complicating, right, is that the space does tend to be unwelcoming, like to various degrees in different masjids across the country, for women. And then who you end up finding there might be somebody who's particularly okay with what the nature and the atmosphere that's been created, right? So when you then ask people, say, even if you just poll women what to do, I know we've talked about before this whole interesting debate at ICP about the barrier, where there was one group, which was sizable, that wanted to remove it. We have a half movable barrier that's there. And there's another group who came to me, actually it was larger, that wanted to make it into a room and actually make a permanent barrier, and block the view fully. And it was interesting, for me to try to understand that. So love to hear about how, when we want to listen to women, right, which is I think the message that you just shared, what do we do in those situations, especially when it's been self-selecting who ends up staying at the masjid over the years? Yeah.
So I think that's a really great question. And what you just described is you have a group of people who self-selected into the atmosphere that was already created in a masjid, and then you're going back to those people and you're asking, okay, among you, who thinks we should change things? So I would say, think about who you're reaching. Who are you reaching, and are you able to reach people outside of the sphere that you've created, the silo you've created for yourself through the culture that you've created? If your culture was not welcoming from the beginning, you have a silo in terms of who you're reaching in the first place. So there's a serious reckoning that has to happen with the higher ups, with upper management, with the imam, with the board of directors. They need to be on board, and they need to ask themselves, how can we reach folks from all over, include our community? Our community is important, and they need to have a voice in any changes that take place in this mosque. But is there anything we can do to get to the greater Pittsburgh population, or the greater whatever population? Because I can tell you for sure that the people you're talking to are not a representative entity. And sometimes that's okay. And sometimes it means, yes, this mosque is going to stay that way, but maybe that just means that there's a need for another space to be created to exist concurrently with that other religious space, whether it's a mosque or otherwise. I will also say, to one of the questions that was asked, how can we better speak up for when men are criticizing women under the topic of hijab, or if it's for their appearance? I think act as a disruptor. If you're an observer in the scenario, you don't need to be silent. You don't need to let the person who's being talked to carry the burden of having to speak up for themselves, because that's a really difficult situation to be put in. Be an ally by speaking up and saying, I don't actually think that's the point of why we're here right now. So maybe we can direct our attention back to the subject at hand. Or you don't have to do it in a way that's mean, but you do have to do it in a way that loudly affirms what you're trying to do in this situation. And sometimes that's going to make you uncomfortable too. Being an ally does not mean you have to be comfortable.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm sorry to cut it off. I got to jump to the next section now. So thank you for all the feedback in scenario 2 and the responses. I think that was really awesome. So next up, scenario 3, Hashim, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, so our third and final scenario here. After a friend dinner, you start talking to Zara. You don't know Zara, you just met her. Later on in the evening, Harris, your trusted friend, confronts you about talking to Zara. He says she isn't a good Muslim girl, makes claims about her, and says that given your character, you should not be talking to her. Perplexed, you stay silent. So again, with our third scenario here, what elements are we observing at play?
I'll take a hit at it, guys. Obviously, just discrimination, right? Based on someone's character or like assumption about someone. And that is so common in this world. I think many people do it, whether they recognize that or not. And I do think there's this hierarchy of like, I'm this good person, I'm this person, and this is where I stand, and I can't be seen with this type of person. I think reputation is such a interesting thing, because reputation has paralyzed so many people from actually being able to teach others by just speaking to them. So many people are so focused on upholding a reputation that they miss being someone that someone can learn from. And I see that often in so many different communities, right? You're so worried about how people may look at you, or your friends may be like, hey, you may not want to talk to this person. They have this reputation and that type of thing. And so because you now are focused on, obviously you want to use wisdom, right? But because you are now so focused on how other people see you, you're not leaving room or space for you to be the light that someone can receive, right? And so I think it's really important that we recognize that reputation can sometimes paralyze us. And in this scenario, we don't know what her need may be. We don't know if you saying hello to her may have stopped her from doing something to herself. We don't know what it could have been, right? But because your friend is like, well, I don't think that's what you should do, you automatically can make the decision of like, you know what, you're right, let me not speak to this person again, because people may be looking at me and I have this reputation to uphold. And your reputation shouldn't just be for people, if that makes sense, because at the end of the day, who you are and how you show up in people's life is part of the purpose. And so you have to be very careful with that. And so, yeah, I would say use wisdom, but be careful with the reputation.
Yeah, I think Yumi really touched well on the idea of like peer pressure, in social situations. And I think that's often undermined as to how powerful a force peer pressure really is. I mean, it's incredibly strong, as far as your reputation and how you're perceived by other people. And so that, there does take a certain amount of strength to combat that and move past that and not let, yourself be influenced by somebody that's doing something that they really shouldn't be doing. Before we go into the second question, any other elements that we're observing at play in the scenario, anybody?
Yeah, I just echo something that Yumi mentioned, which is like oftentimes like our self-worth is tied to like our public self, which makes our reputation really important in our lives and, how we feel about ourselves throughout our lives. And if someone's feeling kind of broken and ashamed and maybe trying to move on from a past that they're not proud of, things like shame, regret, or kind of like airing old public like laundry publicly can kind of paralyze that person from making important progress, like in their dean and in their life in general. So it's not productive behavior. It's not to say that Harris is a horrible person, but you can be an advocate for her in that moment. And that's something Ella touched upon too, is maybe standing up for her would be uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do. I think very often as allies, one area we struggle with is like a lot of times like we report back. We're like, oh, Harris talks about girls in a way that's not nice, or maybe we'll mention it to the young woman who we spoke about. But if we're not standing up in that moment, we're not really being an effective ally, right? So I think that's also an important step that we can institute.
Just to quickly add to what Nina just said, I remembered something because during the last season of 2020, there was so much going on, right? And as a Black woman with friends from all over the world, there was this sense of silence that was so crippling. And I think that you really know what you believe in when you are tested to speak up. And I think that many people don't recognize that you are tested on what you believe. And so if you are here saying, I believe this, I believe that, and the test comes and you are silent, then you don't believe it. It's not something you actually practice. It's something you think you believe. What you believe, you do. And if you know that there's a lot of people in this world that is constantly being treated in a certain way and you don't agree with it, and I understand, don't get me wrong, I understand it's difficult sometimes to put yourself out there. It's difficult to speak up because, you don't want to be seen in a certain way. And this is the dis-ease of peer pressure and the dis-ease of wanting to be seen in a certain way. And you have to be careful in that because there are so many people waiting and counting on you. Sometimes people are looking for your voice because they have lost theirs. And so we must practice, we must put into action what we believe. You can't just say it quietly, privately. You can't be just a success privately. You have to be a success publicly when it comes to friends and people you say that you support. And speaking up, especially when your voice is shaken, is when you know what you believe. And the more you do it, the more confident you get in doing it. So I really employ everyone to just attempt to speak up. Sometimes courage skip a generation, but I don't believe it's happening in this season. And so sometimes we have to really push that out there and be able to say, hey, yo, man, like she said earlier, like that wasn't cool. And that's good enough. That's good enough. You don't have to preach to anyone, but just correcting, because there's a great quote by James Baldwin. He says, if I love you, then I'll correct you, And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be negatively or rough, but those you love, you discipline. And those you care about, you discipline. And we have to create space to say, hey, that's not cool. And then give the people space to show up and change the way we need them to. So I encourage you all to just speak up, even if your voice is shaking.
Yeah, no, really, really insightful things there. Thank you so much. And so our last question here, how can you be an effective ally in social spaces?
I think we've talked a little bit about how to be an effective ally. We focused a lot about speaking up. I wanna combine the question you just asked, Hashim, with one that's in the chat, which is in the scenario C, how does one deal with being ostracized if a person was to speak up? So if this person spoke up and became ostracized from their friend group, what aspects can one reflect on if this was to happen? And I want to let other people respond as well, but I do just want to say, like what Yumi was just talking about hit home for me too. You know, the prophet tells us that you are influenced by the people that you choose to call friends and the people that you choose to surround yourself with. And the people that I care about have corrected me when I have said something, even publicly in front of other people, and they haven't done it in a rude way. But if I said something that was wrong or that was out of line, be like, you know, I don't think that's actually right. I think this is either what you meant to say or what you just said was incorrect. And I love them for that. And I love knowing that I have friends who I can rely on to speak up. And so putting myself in the reverse situation, I would hope that I have friends who, if I was to speak up, they wouldn't ostracize me. But if that does become the case, then I think that becomes a question of who have I surrounded myself with in the first place.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Anything else in the last minute or two here from anybody?
I just want to say that perfectionism is also a disease. So that as a question. And I think that this operating in the spirit of excellence is something that you strive to be. It's not something you should be at all times. There's a level of pressure that we put upon ourselves that prevents us from experiencing life to its fullest, and making mistakes to the point where you can be corrected and change can occur. Perfection doesn't allow you to live. It doesn't allow you to change. It doesn't allow you to learn. It requires you to be something at all times, and that can be quite exhausting. And I think it's important that as allies, when you enter into a space where you're trying to help, whether it's in friendships or more, trying to help, you don't have to have the perfect answer all the time. You don't have to know everything to do. You don't have to always say the right things, okay? You may say the wrong things being an ally. It's okay. Take a deep breath, learn, correct yourself, and come again. I think it's important that we know that you don't always get it right, but the more you practice and the more you're kind to yourself as you learn, the better you will be.
And before we move away from this scenario, I do want to also bring in another question that was asked by an anonymous attendee. What tips do you have for someone who knows something said was wrong but is too shy to speak up, especially when no one else is saying anything? Does it just take practice? I want to connect that question to, especially in a setting where you have locker room talk happening, where and when I say locker room talk, I'm talking about you find yourself in a space with a group of friends, all of whom are on the same page about, maybe they're all male or maybe they're all part of a team. I don't know, you're close to this group of friends and there's a mindset that is dominant in a conversation that is taking place. but you suddenly feel like, oh, something that was just said was out of line or was disrespectful. So no one else is here to overhear what is being said. But I wanted to draw out this scenario for us because I think in that space, we could all be that person that this anonymous attendee is talking about, right? We might be too shy to speak up. And so I'm asking my fellow panelists as well, have you been in this scenario, and what do you have to say for the person who's asking this question?
Yeah, you know, this is something that I've personally struggled with over the years because, you know, I'm somebody that I don't know if shy is the right word. I'm like very afraid of confrontation. You know, like I don't like to, engage in things and cause controversy. And so, you know, I definitely have seen myself in those kinds of situations before. And what I've honestly tried to do is to, you know, when these joking kind of misogynistic topics come up, it's been hard, but I've moved away from kind of just like silently like chuckling to myself to, not perpetuating like a facial expression that is like that perpetuates that behavior. And then even saying things like, guys, I don't know if that's, we should really be saying that, or I don't know if we should really like describe it in that way, that's kind of how I've handled it. And that something so small like that, like Yumi was talking about, does tend to have an effect. If you're not just being one of the people that just agrees with it and perpetuates it, and even if you're not contributing to the conversation but you're not speaking out against it, I do think that makes other people in the group who may feel the same way as you do but are also scared to speak up, it makes them empowered to also be like, what, here's a person that's essentially disagreeing with it. I don't agree with it too, and I feel like I should join that sentiment. So yeah.
I think a tip on that, because I have a lot of shy friends. Yeah, so cute. I always say, sometimes not speaking and removing yourself from that situation every time it happens also speaks volumes. So let's say you're in a situation and the guy is doing the same thing, or the girl, because I want to be careful. Like, there are men that are doing certain things, and then there are women that are literally learning from these men and think that's the way it's supposed to be. So whichever way it is, if you're in that space and you feel that you're not ready to use your words yet vocally, get up and leave and shake your head. Get up and leave. That is a tip I would give you if you don't want to say anything. Anytime it's starting, put your stuff on and leave, and make it a habit so that people can see where you stand rather than you having to say it. Because after a while, most likely they'll come to you and be like, hey man, what's up? What, you don't think I'm funny? Because sometimes you can speak in that way as well. And so I don't want people to think that you can't make any sort of impression on people when it comes to your allyship if you're not yet ready to be vocal with your voice. You can get up and leave the situation. You can do heads like and just walk away. I know it may still seem a lot and you'd rather stay and just be part of the group, but don't. Get up and leave. That is a tip I will give you. And sooner or later, people will recognize where you stand and they'll stop.
Yeah, I agree. I think like as a woman too, like I am acutely aware that my social capital is very strongly tied to the concept of likability. Like as a woman, like I feel like I am expected to be very easygoing. So I know that what Hashem talked about is something that I've definitely struggled with too. And just recently, I've kind of like harnessed the courage because I'm overflowing with empathy, but it's not been until very recently, I'm kind of ashamed to say, that I've been taking that empathy and like putting it into action. But I can offer the following advice from the few situations where I have. I think being gentle but firm. is a tactic that's worked really well. And that's also something that we see like through the life of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Like he was always gentle but firm in his approach with people. And you're not doing anything wrong. Like a lot of the shame that we feel, it shouldn't occupy our mind space as much as it does, because we're not asking for anything that is not our God-given right, or we're not asking for that on behalf of someone, or asking for anything special, right? But I would say gentle and firm, and there's no need to linger on it either, right? You can help that person recover, and hope that later they go back and focus on that correction and maybe do some self-reflection there, but you can help kind of move the conversation along too. Like it doesn't have to be just like dead silence, after the suggestion is given that maybe a comment was inappropriate. You can help move things along, and in that way maybe retain a friend, help them learn and feel comfortable learning around you how to better themselves and better the way that they think about the world and its inhabitants. And you're still enacting really important action from your point of privilege, right? So it's kind of like a win-win, but it does take practice, because initially all of that shame and stuff that has no place, that that kind of takes a front seat, but you have to keep it in perspective and just really push forward, because like Ala said, it just gets easier from there.
Yeah, these are really great points, and I thank you all so much for your insight. So I guess in the interest of time, we should kind of move into our wrap up here. So I believe Wasi, you're
Yeah.
gonna finish
Yep.
up. Yeah.
I'll just say one last question, for the last 5 minutes that we have. I've heard a lot of amazing advice today, on how one becomes a better ally. And we all kind of have described a path, right? Series of actions and consistent practice. But then on that path, the last question I have is how does one know that they are becoming a better ally? Like how do you know if you're doing better or if you're improving? Especially, this is a selfish question. I really want to know, like, as we go through this, what's the best way to know that you're on the right path so you don't figure it out way later that you went the wrong way? Yeah, whoever wants to take it.
I want to go back to the last thing I said about the culture of the group of friends that you have. For me, an indicator of where I am in life is where are my friends at in the conversations that I have with them. So if I have a group of friends who don't ever want to talk about maybe some of the privileges we all have in society and ways that we can use those privileges to open doors for other people. I've had this moment of reckoning before. I had to sit and think, okay, is it just that my friends don't welcome that conversation? And my answer to that was no. It's because I just haven't brought that conversation, that part of myself, into this group of friends. And so that was something I was very intentional about changing. So again, for me, an indicator of where I'm at is what are my conversations with my friends like?
I think for me, a lot of it's a lot of the self-reflection I have and the way I kind of litmus test how well I'm doing as an ally comes down to like my reaction when I'm corrected. Because I think oftentimes just our knee-jerk reaction is to be defensive or to want to withdraw from a conversation. But a lot of the most like pivotal experiences and learnings I've had in my life come from just like that sticking power. You just have to stick in there. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I heard this this example recently, like if you imagine you as a person of privilege, which I am as a white revert, as like wearing steel-tipped boots, and people with less privilege being barefoot, like, and you step on them and they say, ow, you can't be like, hey, well, that's frustrating. Like you should be wearing shoes too, or you don't withdraw from the conversation entirely because you just realize people are walking around barefoot, so there's to say that there, just stick in with the conversation. I know I learn a lot from it. It's super uncomfortable, but you get better over time. And, it's the benefit is felt on both ends.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Thank you, Ella. Yumi, any no pressure?
Yeah, finally, I just would say that I think these are great advice, but be wary of validation because it is a dangerous little friend that many of us carry because we are looking for ways outside of ourselves to remind us what we know. And I would say sit with yourself. You know what I mean? Have deep conversations with yourself because you know how to go in, right? And you know when something is off, whether it's physically in your body or spiritually. And so listen to that, honor that, because I think many people would rather hear something from other people than themselves. And that can be problematic because you know. And many people walk around constantly affirming what they don't know, but I want to remind you that so when you find yourself hesitating, when you find yourself paralyzed in situations, when you find yourself double questioning certain things, when you know you should have done the other, you don't need anyone telling you, and so trust that and be your own form of validation in that way as well. And you'll show up to yourself in a different way and you'll be confident regardless of what other people say.
Thank you, Yumi. And I appreciate it, Ella and Nina, for those closing remarks. I do know that we need 30 seconds to finish out. So I want to pass it to Ella to make sure that we do that before we got to switch.
Thank you so much to all of you for this wonderful conversation that I wish could go on. I do want to tell all the audience before our next session begins that we have a quick tips packet that we have put together full of resources and tips for you to just get started in your allyship. If it's helpful to you, that would be we'd be very happy if it was any benefit to you. We are going to be sending out that packet in the follow-up email after the conference, so please look for that resource. A personal reflection question I wanted to pose to the audience is, we all have various resources. Some of us have a voice that is heard by many. Some of us have really great networks. Some of us have time and some of us have money. So in our lifetime, in your lifetime, what resources do you have access to? And I just want you to think about how you can use those resources to further any of the conversations you hear during this conference, whether it's about allyship or it's diversity in the workplace, etc. Finally, if we did not get to your question or you find yourself having more questions for our wonderful panelists, please know that we have our fireside chat happening later today. If you have not signed up for this session, you just got a message in the chat from Jessica with the Alumni Association. Please feel free to email Jessica directly, or actually it looks like Jessica dropped the link in the chat for you. So please follow that and let us know which of the speakers in this conference you would like more time with to talk more to. And the next session is Empowering Yourself in the Workplace. It starts in 3 minutes. So I want to say thank you so much to our audience who joined us for today's conversation, and to our panelists, thank you so much for your perspectives and everything that you brought to the table. Jazakallah khair.